We are audio only for the recording. Is that accurate?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, cool.
Thank goodness. I don't want anyone to see my ugly mug.
Same. I haven't, done my makeup.
Yeah. Usually have a person for that, but, cutbacks and whatnot.
Welcome to Roll Up the Dice, a Game Master's Guide for better role-playing. I'm Dan.
And I'm Lee, the resident GM of this little podcast.
And today we are speaking with an RPG developer and writer, Travis Legge. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, usually we start off all our podcasts with guest interviews by asking you to explain who you are to our listeners.
Sure. My name is Travis Legge. I'm a game developer and dungeon master. I live in Rockford, Illinois, which is kind of the armpit of the Midwest. It's all of the urban decay of Gary, Indiana, without any of the charm. And yeah, I started out playing when I was a little kid. My older brother got me into D&D when I was like 5.
Nice.
And then I just started when the OGL came out. So I don't know, like 2001, something like that. I put out my first tabletop role-playing game, which was an urban fantasy game called Contagion that drew off of the OGL. And that's now in its second edition. And I was developing as a hobby while I was game mastering, and then it just eventually turned into a career. And now it's basically what I do full time. I do a little bit of media production. I did a brief stint in the independent film business, but I got tired of having my heart broken on a daily basis, so I got out of that.
Yeah.
Now focusing pretty much entirely on role-playing games. I do a little bit of advertising work still, video and audio, a little bit of web stuff, but mostly it's RPGs these days, and a lot of streaming on Twitch of RPGs as well. So that's me, that's who I am, and that's what I do.
Awesome. I think you and Dan could have a lengthy discussion about filmmaking.
And heartbreaking.
If we have to, yeah.
Yeah, and the heartbreak of it.
I'm still in denial, so I'm still attempting to not, say that my heart's broken. But
hey, good luck with it. Sometimes lightning strikes, but when it doesn't, there's I think it was Einstein, right? Said insanity is repeating the same thing and expecting different results.
I believe that's correct. Yes.
I got into my 7th feature film, I think, and just saw that it was kind of the same stuff happening over and over again. So I decided it was time to retire.
Well, let's talk about some role playing then.
it's time to talk about some happy stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, go ahead, Dan.
Well, if you have a question, go ahead. I was just going to ask him something else, but go ahead.
Dan, you're next.
I'm next. Okay. No, I was going to ask about running RPGs. Like, can you talk a little more about running like the games you run, and maybe delve into running them on Twitch as well?
Sure. So on Twitch right now, I have I have 3. I guess I should have asked before we went live if this was a PG-13 or if I
swear all you want. Go ahead and swear.
Oh, sorry.
No problem.
Good, because I was probably going to anyway. I'm sorry.
No problem.
I have terrible self-control. Okay, so I'm running 3 games on Twitch right now. For Tabletop Buffet, which runs on Sundays, which I'll be returning to at 4:30 p.m. Central, I think. I don't know if this is going up before then, but I'm running Storm King's Thunder right now for them.
Okay.
Which with some fairly heavy modifications. They've got some homebrew in the players, and that was something I was actually sort of headhunted to do on Twitter. They asked me to come run for them, so I let them get away with some things I might not let other people get away with because I'm providing them the service of DMing. It's not my game; it's their game.
Sure.
And then on bi-weekly on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Central, I have a Twitch stream I run called Extreme Drowess, which is 5 ladies all playing Drow in the Underdark, and it's set like in the aftermath of Out of the Abyss.
All right.
So
nice.
The first first episode was them basically
Rebuilding.
witnessing Menzo brands and get destroyed.
Yeah,
and that's where it picked up.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Rebuilding all that.
Yeah, and then I'm running Calculated Risks, an Eberron adventure on Fridays at 10 a.m. Central, and that's just a 5th edition Eberron campaign. Bunch of craziness going on. I kind of took the premises that were introduced in the Eberron, like the original Eberron materials, about sort of hunting down these artifacts for House Cannith, and then turned it on its ear a little bit and changed what the artifact did and changed the characters' relationships with it. And that's probably my favorite game out of everything I'm running, including in my personal life. And then I have a home game on Tuesdays and a game I run at my friendly local gaming store on the Wednesdays that I'm not running Extreme Drowis.
You are.
And those are both
busy.
Telderay.
Wow.
Yeah. Yes.
How do you separate? Like, how do you plan for a game a day almost?
Well, my Tuesday night game, I stopped planning for. I aborted the idea of planning for that. I just let the players run into whatever madness they bring on themselves.
Is that because they are good at making choices and saying this is what we're going to do, and you just have to go with it? Or,
I mean, sure, we can say that. No, it's because they're just kind of a chaotic bunch of. I guess I'm being a little unfair because we're about to start a new campaign, so there is some planning going on. But in the last campaign, it was very much a everything but the kitchen sink Planescape campaign that had been running for like a year and a half. So from about the last 6 months or so, I basically would have to give them a vague direction and they would just run with it. And I just had to respond to whatever their improv was. And they were, of course, it's an 8-player game and everybody was playing drastically different personalities. So there were many sessions where it was really just me sitting there and listening to them argue.
Sure, with that many,
which is good because it was in character. It was motivated argument. It was performance. It was in character stuff. It wasn't like players bickering. It was characters that had strong opinions on how things should go. So
yes, it's characters bickering, not the players, which is perfect.
Right.
That's fine. I allow that stuff.
Yeah, and no, and it's brilliant too. And the players I have in that game, they love it. They love sort of having that freedom to not necessarily play the group that's like all buddy and in it, for a common cause and whatever. Like everybody has their own motivations, their own sort of desires, their own goals. And they ultimately, like I said, we just actually ended that campaign and they ultimately pulled together. And we ran the finale session. I'm usually a theater of the mind DM, which lends itself well to running on Twitch too, because I don't have to, worry about, I don't tend to mess with maps generally. I tend to use description.
It's all extra work then,
it's a little easier. But for this big campaign finale, I busted out the minis. It was amazing to see this group of people who had spent the last year and a half bickering about every decision in character just turn into this well-oiled fighting machine when those minis came out. And they were blown away too, like how well they were able to coordinate.
That's interesting that you brought the minis out and changed things.
They're dynamic in terms of combat even. They were like, normally we're a shit show, but once we could see it. And so going forward, I think on that game, when we have a big fight, I think minis will come out a little bit more. Not so much when it's, a quick brawl in an alley or something like that.
Yeah.
But, if there's a big combat, I think we'll be leaning a little bit more on the minis. Just the players seem to dig it. So I can adjust,
Cool. Is there a different way that you approach GMing for Twitch? Because you're not just GMing for the players in the game, you're also kind of GMing and trying to be entertaining for your watchers. So how do you prep for that?
Well, I mean, for me personally, I tend to view GMing as improvisational theater that has a little bit of a board game mixed into it, right? So my goal, no matter where I'm at, is to be entertaining to anyone who might be happening to witness the game. So I don't think there's much shift there. I do try to focus a little bit more on sort of explaining what I'm doing, I guess, in terms of really giving a heavier description of the environment, really explaining the rules that I'm referencing to, in a combat or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Partially because I run with probably, I would say, 3/4 of the players that I'm running with on Twitch have never played D&D before.
Wow.
So, partially to give them the instruction, but also to let the audience know. So if there's somebody who's watching that maybe has never played, that they can sort of follow along with how the game is functioning, and also to keep myself straight and to keep myself from making embarrassing mistakes on the internet.
Oh, that never happens.
Right. I mean, not that. I mean, I've not like received complaints about it, and if I did, hey, you screwed up that rule.
Well,
like, yep.
and it happens all the time.
You ever sit at a table? That happens.
Yeah.
I have to remember everything and the story and all the characters, and I'm doing voices. Yeah, I can screw up a couple of rules here and there. As long as we're having fun, who cares?
Right. And I especially in the Storm King's Thunder, the Tabletop Buffet podcast, I just I have no shame about leaning on my players about their rules. I kind of approach DMing from the perspective that my job is adjudication, knowing what the monsters do in terms of interaction with the rules.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to cast a spell, it's your responsibility to know how that spell is going to interact with the game.
Yes.
And to convey that to me. That's kind of and again, with the new players, I'll escort them to the place where they can find that. We use D&D Beyond a lot. So I'll escort them to where they can find that information, but it really becomes a matter of, you tell me what you're casting and how it works. I'll tell you how that interacts with the environment, which I think ultimately lends itself better to the collaborative storytelling side of dungeon mastering.
Of course, if they know their character inside and out and what their characters can do, and then describe that in the story, that helps. Yeah, they're telling their part of the story, and you have the other side.
Right, and that to me, that's really what it's about. It's about having that group storytelling experience. I've run games in the past, where I'll have players that just, I want to hit them. And,
How do you hit them? Yeah, I hit them really hard. Okay.
All through our lives, there's always one player that we always thought, I really want to hit them, but
right. Only one. But no, it's and that's fine, and there's nothing wrong with that. If that's where your group is at, you know what I mean? I would recommend trying to foster some growth in terms of that and trying to encourage them to engage more directly in the story. And that's really where all that sort of came from, where my reliance and leaning on the players to know what their characters can do and for them to describe it. It came from being at tables where, it was, I hit him, I got a 12. What happened?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
I find it interesting because, like, to look at it that way, the way you play it, where you rely on the players to know the rules and kind of like bring up what they can do and what happens, what their spell can do to you, then it leaves you up to concentrating on the story and you're not worrying about, if they do this, this is going to happen, or I gotta watch out for these rules, or it's just, I can concentrate on story. You, the players, concentrate on your end, but if you want to use what your player can do, you need to know the rules of how it works.
Right. And that also, because I'm not using bandwidth to, like, when I plan an encounter, right, I try my best not to tailor it to the players that are going to be involved in it. I try my best to tailor it to the place in the larger narrative that encounter inhabits, right?
Okay.
So I'm not thinking in terms of tactically, what are my players going to do and how do I address that? I'm reacting almost like a player who's running this group of kobolds or this dragon as their character. And as a GM, that actually gives me a greater pleasure and a greater surprise when I'm engaging in a combat and they pull out a spell that they never cast that's just custom fit for this moment. You know what I mean? That I didn't see coming. And that's cool because it keeps me on my toes and lets me have that enjoyment of the unfolding story. Rather than sitting there and trying to look at it as a tactical engagement in which my job is to defeat or inconvenience them, I'm looking at it as Asarak's really mad at you and wants you to die, you know? and those are his motivations, you know? So.
When you look at GMing, like for people who might want to GM for the first time, a lot of times we say, well, it's important for you to be flexible and to be able to improv on the moment and stuff. As far as like the game that they're going to be playing or running for the first time, what tips or what would you tell them to make sure they do know when they're starting off?
Well, I mean, keep it simple. There's absolutely nothing wrong with, cleaning rats out of the basement of a tavern, especially your first time out. Grab the simplest adventure you can find on the DM's Guild, or grab the starter set for 5th edition. If you're playing D&D, if you're playing a different system, grab something or construct something. Look through the rules and look for the simplest enemy or the simplest scenario you can generate, and then look at the capabilities that you're going to have in that scenario and look at it from kind of a player perspective, like what are the antagonist's motivations, what do they want, what do they think they want, if you really want to give yourself another layer of interaction, in your own mind, and another layer of motivation. That sort of, sometimes there's a bit of a dichotomy between what somebody actually wants and what they think they want. That can be a fun thing to play as a DM, even in a first adventure, because that also gives if you know those items, that gives the players a non-combat opportunity to try to address the situation, if that makes sense. And then just encourage your players to, look up there and having a sit down at the beginning to say, to explain how you would like the table to move is probably a good tip for a starting DM. Sit down and say, all right, we're going to get into combat. When that happens, I'm going to be asking you X, Y, and Z. I would like you to be ready when it comes to your turn, and have X, Y, and Z ready for me. And if you need to take a moment to look something up, take a moment to look something up. No shame in it. It's better to look it up and be right than to guess, be wrong, and then have to go back and have egg on your face.
Bring back a character from the dead.
Right. Or even just, I've looking up things when you're not sure is probably or even when you are sure is probably my weakest point as a DM. I frequently just fly off the cuff. If nobody immediately knows what the rule is, I just make a ruling and move on. And I'm not afraid of using the hand wavium of that just worked weird that time.
Yes.
Which you can also do, and don't be afraid to do that either. Don't be afraid to say, oh, well, a mistake was made, but the universe is strange and we live in a world with magic and dragons. Maybe everything doesn't work the same way.
There you go. That's a perfect reasoning why. Like, sure. And that's fine because you have so many roles as a GM. You have to keep the game flowing, making sure everyone is having fun. But then on the flip side, making sure those new people understand the rules, helping them out. Yeah, it's that balance.
Absolutely. And simplicity is the key. The reason I think that Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is as popular as it is right now and is having this big boom that it is. Mm-hmm. Yes, Twitch is a big factor. Yes, celebrity presence is a big factor. Of course, all those things are huge factors. But the fact that it's a simple, elegant system that a 10-year-old can pick up by themselves and know the basics of in the matter of 15, 20 minutes, I think that's a huge deal. There's the barrier to entry is super low. So I guess I don't feel that it's too big of an ask to have your players make sure that they can cross it. You know what I mean? Make sure that they know those basics.
I would agree. But we've been talking a lot about D&D. Are there some other games you're running right now or wanting to play?
I'm not actively running anything else right now because I started doing publishing on the DM's Guild when it first came out, and I've been just falling into project after project and really immersing myself in D&D.
Mm-hmm.
I have some stuff in the works from the publishing side. I play a bit of Savage Worlds, and I publish a few Savage Worlds settings, and that's always fun. I don't know that I necessarily would enjoy running Savage Worlds as much as I enjoy playing it.
And why is that, do you think?
There are things about the Savage Worlds system that, like core functions of the Savage Worlds system, that my inner game designer wants to go in and ratchet.
I think I found another person that doesn't necessarily like that system, and that I tried it so many times, and there's great things in there. It's simple, but the mechanics are a little bit wonky.
They are a little wonky, and it's interesting because as a player, see, and this is the other thing that's funny about Savage Worlds to me. It seems to me that as a player, I can sit down, play Savage Worlds, have a grand old time, and never have to worry about it, right? Like the mechanics, the player-facing mechanics are very, very simplistic, and it lets you sort of shut your brain off and have fun, and that's grand. But I feel like maybe, and I can't believe I've never actually put this together until this very moment, but I think it's because the balance of responsibility for mechanics tips way too far to the guide in Savage Worlds. You can't just have your players know what their stuff does and run that game.
Yeah, because
you know what I mean. Like you have to know way too much
you have
run Savage.
Yeah, you have to know what their you have to know what their toughness is, and then if they soaked, if they're going to do all these other things, and sometimes it can get complicated. Like, oh, are you are you shaking right now or not? I don't know. When I've run it, I just have that difficulty with it. But I don't know.
It's a lot for the DM to track.
I think you're right too. Maybe I didn't realize it too until you just mentioned it. That maybe it's a lot more heavy on the GM to keep all that knowledge or information going, as well as doing the story and keeping it interesting.
Yeah, I think that's probably my biggest roadblock with any system is how much labor is it really putting on the GM. And it's one of the reasons I absolutely adore the World of Darkness system. Talk about a system that by and large has zero DM labor. You know what I mean? Like you just don't have to know anything to run that game. You can just make stuff up. And all the rules are just so straightforward and elegant.
I do remember that system being pretty, as far as when I played it, pretty simple and easy, and especially for my character, it was kind of easy to track what I had and what I could do without having so many I don't know what you call it, just like so many things, other things that you just never forget or forget about and never use.
Yeah, modifiers. Modifiers are the bane of good design. They're just awful. They're anti-elegance is really what they are. And more as I look at things from a design perspective and approaching GMing from a perspective of a designer, I want things that are elegant and that don't require me to do a whole lot of math at the table. And that was the big downfall, D&D 3.5.
Oh, definitely.
Or your Pathfinder. It's just like, I need my graphing calculator so I can figure out what my attack bonus is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. And that's fine for some people that love that. I know there's plenty of people that's how their brain works, and they love figuring all that stuff out. But for me, I'm more of a story-based and just flying by the seat of your pants, having fun, instead of having to sit down and, yes, like you said, get that slide ruler out maybe and figure out your bonus for a hit.
For sure. And I am never one to slap the dice out of somebody else's hand. You run the game however you want to run the game.
Yes.
And quite frankly, I'll happily sit at a table with Pathfinder with a stack of 20 different books that we have to cross-reference for everybody's character as a player. I had no problem with that. But I don't enjoy the work that goes into managing that as a GM. If people do, more power to them. invite me. I'll happily come play at your table. But
There you go.
I just won't run it. Other games that, and there are sometimes there's, the opposite is true. I do occasionally love running me some Rifts, just because I think if you're going to dive into the crazy math stuff, you might as well go whole hog.
Oh man. Yeah. There's that too.
There's a lot of math.
That can be fun, but I mean, I've never been involved in a Rifts game that wasn't just an exercise of who can come up with the craziest shit to bring to this table.
It's just insanity.
No, there's definitely been times I've been at a game and it's been, oh, it's your turn. And you're like, okay, well, I got to make this roll to see what kind of advantage I get. And then I got to make this roll to see what kind of, disadvantage he's at, or like pluses I get for this spell. And then before I can even make my attack roll, and you're sitting there waiting and like, why isn't this just one roll? Why is this so difficult? Or why do I have to wait so long to do all these extra bonuses?
Right. And I'm a big fan of having, like, the good thing about that is that it gives, to a degree, it gives a narrative control to the player, right? Because the player, one thing you get when you have 20 modifiers to a roll is that player and that character's circumstance creates a specific condition under which they're able to do this awesome thing. I'm all for that. I just prefer it to be done narratively, right? So, like, not to toot my own horn or whatever, or be a self-promoting whore, but I'm going to be a self-promoting whore for a minute. I put out a game called Glimpse the Beyond. And the magic system in Glimpse the Beyond is entirely based on assembling spell components and then using those to describe what your spell does, right? So it's a ton of modifiers, really, because there's a lot of math that goes into it. You have to figure out how many points you're spending on this component, how many points you're spending on that component. So it can be very mathy, but it can also be a narrative opportunity where you're sitting there and saying, as I'm drawing the power of fire together, and I'm reaching into the, my connection to the animal kingdom to grasp the eyes of the eagle so that I can see better, so I'm more accurate. You can really drive it narratively. And it's designed with that in mind. Hopefully that comes across in the book.
It did.
What's that?
I said it did.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. But yeah, so I mean, if used properly, those modifiers can be really cool because they're giving you a narrative tool. But I feel like in your math-heavy games, in your Rifts, in your 3.5 or Pathfinder, and things like that, it's really just, let me stack a bunch of crap together.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the narrative is I draw an arrow and fire it.
Yeah, it gets lost in all those numbers, and and your arrow hits. Cool.
Right. And I think some of that is, again, to go back to Glimpse the Beyond, Mage was really good with this too, Mage the Ascension. And I heavily borrowed conceptually from Mage when I was working on the system for Glimpse the Beyond. I wanted to emulate that style.
Cool. Well, yeah, let's...
I'm a huge Mage fan. I think it's good. But it was the idea that you have these effects that are not terribly well defined, right? And you have to plug those holes narratively to make your effect happen. Any mage with forces 3, prime 2 could theoretically throw a fireball, but you have to describe why your homeless trash witch, why their belief system allows them to throw that fireball, and how you're constructing this fireball and how you're making it work, right?
All that.
And then you have the added layer of narrative difference between vulgar and coincidental magic. That really trips a lot of my triggers in terms of, I guess, maybe satiating that slight hunger that all gamers might have for the math and the numbers and the modifiers, but framing it in that narrative context that makes it not boring.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, when it becomes part of the storytelling aspect, the numbers and the math is all part of describing or developing what's going on or developing your character. It makes sense. But when it's just there to give you a power strike or something like that, I think sometimes that can get a little boring.
Indeed. And I think that stems from, the tabletop wargaming origins, of tabletop role-playing.
Yeah.
Everything sort of goes back to, moving around minis on terrain type, chainmail, Warhammer, that kind of level of gaming. And that's where a lot of these stem from. And it's very challenging to play, to create, or to run games that don't fall back to that reference at some level. One of my personal greatest regrets as a human being
and
as a dungeon master is my inability to get my head around Fate. I can't get my head around that system.
Okay.
What's that?
Oh, I said, okay. I have not even attempted to try Fate. Dan, have you played?
I think I looked at it. I don't think I ever got into it.
Well, because as I read it, for all the world looks to me like an exercise in bullshitting. Like you pick 7 or 8 aspects or whatever of your character, and then the whole game is about how can I bullshit this aspect to be relevant enough for me to throw dice in this situation. Which could be fun, I suppose. Just not anything I'm horrendously interested in. If I'm gonna do that, I'll just sit around with my friends and like do improv storytelling, and we won't even use dice.
Yeah, there you go. That's even easier. It needs a little bit. So it sounds like it needs a little bit more basis in something, or rules, a little bit more rule structure. Is the word I'm looking for.
A little more crunch, yeah. I mean, and I could that could be because I'm not reading it right. You know what I mean? That could be because that could be my shortcoming. Probably is.
Fair
but
enough.
As I read it, it really looks like improv storytelling with the thinnest veneer of rules slapped on for no really good reason.
And that's and that's really interesting, because as a GM, we talked about, if you're going to start running a game for your very first one, you have to kind of find those systems that speak to you, that you really like, that you figured out that these rules are part of, will help me in my storytelling, or however I want to run the game. If it's more story, character, background based, or more hack and slash and rules heavy, you have to look for those games.
Absolutely, you got to find something that that you click with and that you understand.
Yeah, I know.
It's very difficult to run a game. I've been in the position of being asked to run games that I'm not horrendously comfortable with in the past. And I wouldn't say it ever turned out like poorly, but it's not nearly as good as an experience where I either at least know enough about what I'm doing, or feel confident enough in what I'm doing to let the system not be center stage. And I guess that would be another piece of advice, is just read enough to where you feel comfortable enough that the system does not need to take center stage outside of like a combat situation or another place where it's required, I guess, to be center stage.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to run a game where you play for 2 hours and nobody touches a die.
I love those games.
Yeah,
I love doing that. That's fun.
It's a lot of fun. And that's where some of the best, interactions and story moments can happen. But, the other side of that coin is know how to read your players. Sometimes some players will get twitchy if it goes too long before they get to stab something.
Yeah, they got to smash something at some point.
So just, be aware. And open communication with your players is a huge deal. Ask them what they want.
Yeah.
Session zeros are huge. And I didn't really do them for a very long time. It was probably in my 30s before I started really embracing the idea of doing a session zero, where we just get together, make our characters, and talk about what we want.
That is
and that's a huge thing, because that gives you a basis from which to operate in terms of the narrative. It gives you an opportunity to interact with the rules in a low risk environment. I think that's something that people overlook when they're talking about the importance of session zero. Is you can sort of look into, what does this class do, or what does this race do, or what does this spell do, and examine that in a situation where you're not also dealing with the stresses of, and this kobold's about to eat my character's face, or whatever. You know what I mean? Like it's a low risk environment, so you can sort of see how it plays out and ask questions and investigate the system side.
Have you ever done a session zero on Twitch?
I've done session 0 for my Twitch games, and then what I'll do is I'll record it and I'll put that up on my Patreon for my Patreon supporters exclusively. So
Cool.
I've never done one live, I don't think, on Twitch.
No, I was going to ask if you did one, like we'd send a link to it, but I mean, I think it's even better. Now you can say, go support you on Patreon, and then you can go see some of these session zeros.
Exactly. Yeah, that's usually content that I try to put up for the Patreon. I try to be as active on Patreon as I reasonably can be. So I'll put up campaign notes. If I'm planning an encounter, sometimes I'll throw up just like my sloppy Word document about what that looks like. And I actually did that. I just put out a product on Dungeon Masters Guild called A Small Problem, which is the refined and polished adventure that I just ran on the Extreme Drawist stream. But 3 or 4 weeks ago, I threw up my notes for that on my Patreon. So it was really just like, here's the stats, here's a basic idea of where the rooms are, so you can sort of see. I try to make it so that you can see the process from concept of me as a GM moving it into like an actual published product. So that's that was kind of the aim with that. I try to do that as often as I can.
We'll ask you again at the end of the podcast, but what is your Patreon called? Like, what are you? Yeah.
Oh, it's just patreon.com/Travis Legge.
Cool.
I suck at names, I guess. I don't know.
Well, it's hard for me to do a Patreon for myself because like Grishkoviak, no one's gonna be able to spell that, and I find that.
Right. Yeah. No. And my name is deceptive, and I should come up with something better, but because there's a bunch of vestigial letters at the end of mine. But that's because it's Scottish, so I'm pretty sure that whenever they spelled it, they were just drunk.
Add a G. How about another E? Why not?
Yeah, probably.
Well, actually,
but yeah, so that's my Patreon is just patreon.com/Travis Legge.
Awesome. Well, actually, I want to get back to Glimpse the Beyond because this is your second edition, and I found out about it on Kickstarter. And,
yeah.
I just want to talk about how you developed it and why you thought you needed a second edition.
Well, it's actually kind of a funny story. I used to just hunt around for like open source game systems. The idea for me was I would train myself as a designer by going in and ratcheting and tweaking existing open content. And then releasing that as a product was just kind of like a byproduct of doing that. So the original edition of Glimpse the Beyond really stemmed from a vague concept of wanting to do like a Lovecraftian horror, but do it where the protagonists aren't necessarily just screwed, where you have a little bit of power, and if you're smart, you can survive a while kind of thing, and maybe make a dent in the darkness.
Yes.
So that was it for the first edition. I had that in the system, and I wanted to try a magic thing that was reminiscent of Mage. And then as the book sort of took off, the first edition book sort of took off, I just started making little supplements here and there. Like, oh, well, maybe I should come up with some societies. Let's do a secret societies book. Maybe I should, look at like, what if want to play somebody who's delving into the darker arts? Let's do a book about that. And so I wound up with like this 72-page core book, and then I don't know, like 10 supplements. One of the supplements was like, let's throw this in the far future because I'm a huge sucker for the Trinity that White Wolf did. This like far future space exploration with psionics type of thing. And so I was like, let's see how this magic would interact with space travel. And taking the fight to the great old ones that are beyond the darkness of space, right? Well,
sure.
What if you can show up in a spaceship and shoot Cthulhu in his face?
Yep.
Because there's a Rifts player living inside of me is really what it boils down to. But,
well, it fits well.
What's it?
It fits well. I'm trying to think of that movie, that horror movie with space.
Event Horizon.
Event Horizon, perfect, like that.
Yeah, I mean, like, and the idea, two of the big references I pulled from when I was putting that particular supplement called Threshold of Chaos, when I was putting that together, was Event Horizon and Starship Troopers.
Yeah.
And I wanted to find whatever like the happy medium between those two things was. So
It's two completely different feeling movies, but combining them.
right.
It can work
And
sometimes.
being able to jump between the two of them, because I love, going from like a film or television perspective, I love like Supernatural, I think is one of the most masterfully crafted narratives on television, particularly if you look at the first 5 seasons, but even still going forward, because there is this ability for it to be downright horrifying and then turn on a dime and be the funniest thing you've ever seen in your life and then jump right back into the horror. And if you can do that and pull that off and make that work, I think it's taking the tension release that horror needs to function and dialing it up to 11. But anyway, sorry, I got sidetracked. So I put together this first edition. I put together all these supplements for it, and I'm looking at it and going, the system needs work. I really should try to like put this together in one book that is cogent and makes sense. I should really build an actual setting, right? Because the setting was sort of more of like piecemeal chunks spread across 10 books.
Mm-hmm.
So I got in touch with CJ Hurt, who had actually done some writing years ago. I did a fiction anthology for Contagion, which is the modern horror urban fantasy game I do. And I got a hold of him and said, what do you think about building me a world, man? I know you are into the Lovecraft stuff. What do you think about building the world? And he was all over it. He was like it was his calling, He was like, this is perfect. I want to do this. So I did all the system updates and he did all the world building. We ping-ponged ideas back and forth to make sure that everything fit. That's one of the things as a game designer that I've learned over the years is you can have the best setting in the world, you can have the best system in the world. If those two don't jive together and you slam them together, it's not going to be fun for anyone involved.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If they don't reflect one another, doesn't matter how smooth your system is or how great your world building is. The system needs to reflect the setting. So we did a lot of work in terms of making sure that was the case. And then, decided to put it together for Kickstarter. That was an adventure. Every time you do a Kickstarter, it's an adventure. We've run into some challenges with our printer, which actually I'm happy to announce here, especially since talking to you, Lee, and you backed the Kickstarter.
Yes.
I got the updated hardcover proof finally.
Awesome.
We should be sending those out to people hopefully in the next week or two.
Well, that's great to hear.
Everything's done now. There was a whole long story, but to shorten it up, the printer we were going with changed some of their specs, and there was a nightmare process for about 6 months where nobody knew what they were doing. Ugh. And that seems to have been abated now.
Good.
So
cool.
I let a couple other publishers be the canary down that coal mine before I went back.
Sure.
But it seems to have been corrected.
Yeah, that happens with Kickstarters, and as long as everybody knows what's going on, most people are cool about it, and that's neat. That's one good thing.
I have nothing but love for the Kickstarter community. We were shown a great deal of kindness, both during the campaign and afterward. I'm really happy with how that went. I don't know. I will go back to Kickstarter for a game. I just don't know. I don't have any immediate plans to. I guess would be the best way.
Is that because you don't have anything right now to Kickstarter, or is that because you just don't know if you want to put that much time and effort into a Kickstarter again?
I don't like. It's funny. I know, and that as long as you're communicative with your people, with your backers, the Kickstarter community is very understanding, very cool about delays. They understand how this process works, right? That doesn't stop me from losing sleep over it. Sure. So I would rather just build things and bring them to market, or have something like completely ready to launch before I do another Kickstarter, and make sure that I've got all the ducks in a row, and make sure that even the things that I think are going to be there, that I know that they're going to be there, because I really do feel awful and have lost many nights of sleep over the way that the hardcover situation played out with Glimpse of Beyond. And that's my own baggage. It's just, and at the end of the day, I don't necessarily have any ambitions that I need to do it that way. It's a nice way to launch a book, but I think we can get similar results, especially with the next couple projects I'm working on. I'm doing a lot for the DMs Guild, and that's just a no-no for Kickstarter, and a couple of other community content settings. And I'm actually, and this is the first, like I've talked about this a little bit on my Patreon, but I think this is the first real public forum I've discussed it on. I'm working on the 5e compatible version of Contagion, because it was originally just like a urban fantasy reskin of 3.5, and then I updated the rules and did a lot of tweakings to make the system and the setting more harmonious. And when 5th edition came out, I really was intrigued by the system, but I wasn't sure how I would fit the setting and the system together in a harmonious fashion. And now that I've been developing for 5e for 2 years, 3 years, however long it's been now, and now that I've played so much of it, I think I've cracked that nut. So I think what we're going to do, I'm in development right now on 5th edition, or the 5th edition compatible Contagion. And my plan is to release the core book that has all the basic rules that you need, has each of the basic races and 1 or 2 sub-races, and each of the basic classes and 1 or 2 subclasses. And then I'm going to lean pretty heavily on community content, because we have a community as well that's similar to the DMs Guild. So I'm going to lean pretty heavily on community content to patch those gaps in the setting and let people take their own spin on it and make it what they want it to be. I do have some other creators that I've sort of recruited from the guild that are going to have involvement in the initial launch. So as we go up with the new core book, we'll also have several community content created resources to go along with it, people that I kind of handpicked to be involved. But that's my plan for that. And so that doesn't lend itself well to a Kickstarter either. And that's probably going to be like between that D&D stuff and things for the Scarred Lands and Pugmire community content, that's probably going to be my 2018 completely.
All right.
Yeah, that's a lot of stuff to keep track of.
Yeah.
If you're running a game constantly, basically, and then you're also developing and redoing your system and creating content for side adventures and all this other stuff. You're so busy.
I'm a workaholic is part of the problem. But when you love what you do, it's not work. I mean, that's not true. It's still work, but it's less work, I guess. I don't know. It's nice. It's fun to be able to do this stuff. And fortunately, I've, I guess, been able to like build relationships with some really cool people in the community, which has helped. Just knowing that there are people I can lean on if I need help in terms of development and stuff. And I just happen to like gaming, and so it's a nice way to promote myself doing something I like.
Well, I hope you like gaming, because otherwise that's
right.
Be pretty depressed if that was your life and you hated gaming.
Right. And so far I haven't burned out on it. There may come a day. But it's nice to be able to, because when you're relying on this stuff, one of the biggest challenges as an independent developer, particularly in a crowded market, right? There's a lot of people making Dungeons and Dragons stuff, for example. One of the things that you have to have is visibility. And you can either get that by spending a whole bunch of money on advertising or by just constantly be doing new stuff. I opted for constantly doing new stuff. So I get to share a link to something new every day on my social media, something new that people can go look at. And that helps immensely. And it's not for everybody. I wouldn't necessarily recommend trying that. I mean, obviously I have the freedom of not having a day job. I have the freedom of, with the other freelance that I do to supplement my income, I get to choose when I want to do that and when I don't. For the most part. Every once in a while, a big bill comes through, and I'm like, well, I guess I'm just going to do whatever falls in my lap. But fortunately, the role-playing game publishing has treated me well enough that I've got the freedom to say no to most stuff I don't want to do. So it's only taken me 16 years to get here. So
hey, some people are still, great place to be.
Yeah, it is. It really is. So I like it. I'm really happy with where things are at professionally, and I imagine after this big 2018 push, I'll probably ease up a little. But
will you though? Will you?
We'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Run 2 games a day. And...
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, and I completely spaced too. I also have can't believe I didn't mention this. I have a show that I do on Twitch on Mondays where I talk with other community content creators. So it's just like a 1-hour talk show, basically, where I interview them and they talk about what they do and how they started gaming and all that stuff and their design philosophies. It's a lot of fun.
Cool.
Oh, I'll have to check that one out.
Yeah, it's called the DM's Guild Hall. It's on Mondays on my Twitch channel, sometimes at 1 p.m. Central, but I talk to people from all over the planet, so I just shift my schedule accordingly because I don't have like a boss to answer to. So every once in a while, I'll talk to somebody in Australia, and we're broadcasting like 11 o'clock at night. But I also put everything up on my YouTube afterwards, so you can see it there.
Cool. When you are, because you create a lot of adventure books and things like that for game supplement material, how do you approach writing those for other GMs?
It's really about trying to provide the skeleton and a couple of tendons that let those bones move, seed them with enough to build their own musculature and flesh on it. Being very careful not to overwrite things, but to convey your mood for sure and the function of the environment. And that's a really hard balance to hit. And some of the biggest keys to that, I think, are having beta readers, people you can lean on to tell you where your blind spots are. It's very difficult to know where your own blind spots are. Playtesting, particularly playtesting with people that aren't you. Give it to somebody else and have them run it. See if they can. See if they run any walls. Those are really the things that you have to do because you're not at everyone's table. You don't know who is sitting at those tables. You don't know what they're bringing in terms of their party. And I think that trying to anticipate any possible combination of parties is just foolish. It's just you can't. No matter how well prepared you make something, there's going to be some guy out there that's playing a half vampire, half cat folk, homebrew ranger monk multi-class that's going to throw a wrench in your works. So how do you address that? You create things that provide a narrative framework for the DM, give them enough system to make it functional, and encourage them to flesh that out in a way that's suitable to their table.
Do you have any of the blind sides or shortcomings that you found out you had that you can give advice to other people writing?
Yeah, I absolutely hate writing box text. I hate reading it. I hate its existence. It's awful. Yeah. But I had to I'm trying to get over that in terms of crafting adventures because it is, I think, a useful tool. But like when I read an adventure that somebody else has written, I skip the box text, generally speaking, unless I'm reading to do a review. I try to do a review on the DM's Guild every day to keep the just to help the community to keep people's products up there, so I can share a link that says I reviewed this today. Go check it out. So when I'm reading for review purposes, I read every word. But if I'm reading to run something, I skip the box text. And if I have to go back up and read the box text because I don't know what the hell's going on in the room, I really feel like that writer has failed. You know what I mean? They shouldn't be giving me information only in the narrative that I'm reading out loud.
Yeah.
So, but by the same token, the writer in me thinks I should also omit every unnecessary word from this document. I should get rid of, kill my babies and get rid of everything that doesn't need to be here. So with box text, in my mind, being redundant by ideal, it's also, removed ideally. But I understand its purpose and I understand that people use it. So I'm trying to incorporate that a little better.
That's much harder. Isn't box text used to give the GM a little bit more that the players shouldn't know?
No, I'm referring to the read aloud text, I guess I should say.
Yeah, you walk into a room and it's musty. The air has been stale for thousands of years. Yeah, and it goes on and on like that, trying to have rich texture to the situation. And instead of you just describing what's there, it tries to have almost like a poem of some kind, or it can go overboard sometime.
It is frequently this overwritten sophomore in high school attempt to copy Tolkien sort of text.
Yep. Yep. Using words that you never heard of, and you have to look in the dictionary. Like, why don't you just use dreary?
Right. Yeah. I could bitch all day.
About me too. Me too.
But if it's well executed, there's a place for it. And so I try to do it, but do it as succinctly as possible. Like, here's 2 sentences that you can read, and build from there. So it's about economy of words, and that's in general. I don't think I'm unique in that, but that's probably one of my biggest challenges as a writer, is really making sure that I'm taking advantage of my word economy, that I'm not throwing unnecessary flowery prose in there, but that I am also conveying the mood, theme, feel.
That's great.
It's a hard balance to hit.
Yeah, and that's perfect, because sometimes as a player, the DM is reading that box text. You were listening for the first 2 sentences, and now you stop paying attention. You no longer care because it's going on. And then he's done, or he or she is done reading it. Then you ask, so what's in the room?
Right. Yeah. If any of your players are like, so what do I see? After you finish reading the box text,
yep,
that writer has failed.
That's a good tip for writers. Yeah, great.
Yeah, it's. So yeah, I mean that's one of the things. The other thing too is just making sure, from a system perspective, making sure everything is tuned properly, right? New mechanic, it can sometimes be a little difficult to recall everywhere where that mechanic might interact, and that's where playtesting comes into play to a degree. But there's also just sort of rereading your own sources, right? Going back and saying, this feature doesn't work with this because when you introduce this class, it breaks it. That sort of stuff can be tricky. And especially if you're like a GM that's developing your home table, you can dial that into your players, right? You can look at your player sheets and go, okay, none of this is going to bump up against what I'm doing here with this creature in a way that breaks the game. But again, when you're introducing it out into the world, you have to sort of consider the entirety of at least the official system. You know what I mean? You're never going to account for people's homebrew.
Yeah.
And that's them breaking the game, not you.
Sure.
But you want to make sure that you're not introducing something busted.
Yeah, that can happen. Yeah, real easily. I made a new character class. Oh, so it's just a fighter, warlock, and sorcerer all in one, and you can do everything? Neat.
Right. My level 3 feature is I'm God.
Yeah. Oh, done. Perfect.
Yeah, it is a bit of a challenge. And I guess the other advice I would give to that is, and any time in DMing, always look it up, double check yourself. Even things, you call tech support because your computer's not working. They're probably going to ask you if it's plugged in and turned on. because they've talked to the person who called and their computer wasn't plugged in or turned on. You know what I mean? Make sure your computer's plugged in and turned on. Check the basics. Make sure that you haven't come up with some brilliant way to, interact with the system with this cool concept that, breaks like the basic rule of the game. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that comes with
and
experience.
I say that from experience. I've done that.
Yeah, I've done that too, where we've been playing it wrong for 3 months. Then I stop and wait a minute, hold on a second. Look at it. Hey guys, we've been doing it wrong. All right, well, let's do it correctly now for here on out.
Right. I mean, it's just, always check yourself before you wreck yourself, I guess.
There you go. Yeah, I think we're getting near the end of the excuse me, the interview. Is there any other question you have, Dan?
Is there anything else you want to talk about or you're working on next?
I'm thinking in terms of next, I've got, so people will be able to buy the hardcover of Glimpse of the Beyond as soon as I get it rolled out to the Kickstarter backers. It is currently available in PDF at drivethrurpg.com. I'm currently curating stories for Dungeon Tales Anthology number 2 through the DMs Guild. We just did Anthology 1. The focus is to collect adventures that may have been overlooked when they were initially released in the DMs Guild. For whatever reason, they maybe didn't get the attention they deserved. And I'm working along with MT Black, who is like the number 1 seller on the Guild, to sort of give some more visibility to these creators and to get their work out there in an anthology that is sort of inspired by the old Dungeon magazine.
Nice.
And so we're presently looking for submissions for Dungeon Tales number 2. And we are trying to emphasize as much as possible. We especially would like to see submissions from creators of color, LGBTQ creators, female creators, anyone who's, outside of the bounds of, standard white dude living in his mom's basement.
Yeah.
Not that we don't want to see those too, but I specifically would like to just extend that invitation for anyone from, for lack of a better word, marginalized communities within the industry. Mm-hmm. We want to see your work. We want to see your adventures. We want to. It's about lifting up as many voices as we can and as diverse of voices as we can. And those submissions can be sent to better look it up before you say it, Travis.
Don't wreck yourself.
Right, exactly. Take your own advice. I'm looking up the email address right now. Where
no problem.
Can send me
I can edit all this stuff out, so no worries.
Right on. And then, like I said, issue 1 is out right now, and we can will be on print on demand soon as well. So it's the email address that they would want to send to is newdungeonadventures@gmail.com. And it's all one word, newdungeonadventures@gmail.com. So ideally, they would send a inquiry email, just a quick note, and a complimentary copy of the product they want to submit through Dungeon Masters Guild. It's got to be DMs Guild. That's the only site we're accepting stuff from. Mm-hmm. And it's got to be previously published. But you can, if you hear this and you want to put something out today and then send us a note, that's fine. What else have I got cooking? I just had a bunch of stuff come out. Xanathar's Extraordinary Vault is a collection of magic items. It's up on the Guild. It's been in the number 1 bestseller for the last couple weeks. So that's kind of cool. It just got knocked out by Monsters of the Guild, which is another anthology. It's like a monster manual that I worked on, which is now the number 1 seller, which is neat.
Very cool.
It's weird to dethrone yourself from the top, but I'm a much smaller part of Monsters of the Guild. I'm a tiny cog in a huge machine on that project. But it's super cool. I highly recommend checking that out. And I just launched the first product for the Scarred Lands. I'm going to mangle this pronunciation. Solarian Vault, their community content program, which is on drivethrurpg.com. If you look up Rangers of Gelspad, it's a collection of ranger archetypes. It's the first product for their brand new community content program. So If you're interested in Scarred Lands, which if you're not familiar is like it's D&D, but it's like super grimdark.
Neat.
It's exceptionally grimdark. It's like Dark Sun on crack.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Yeah, that's they just launched a community content program. So if there's anybody out there that wants to build adventures in that kind of a setting or create new character archetypes that would function in that kind of a setting, you can head over there, go to the Onyx Path website, or go to their store, the Onyx Path publishing store at Drive-Thru RPG. Just look for the Sluretian Vault or the Scarred Lands, either one, and you'll be able to get the information there about that. But yeah, check that out. And then I'm always throwing up new, like one-off archetypes at Dungeon Masters Guild all the time. I just put up a new archetype for the Blood Hunter like yesterday. I try to be always designing something new and always putting something small out there. Partially just keep the tools sharp, but also to keep people's eyes on my work.
Yeah, that's important.
So very, very much so. And then CJ and I have been talking about doing some more content for Glimpse Second. We've just both been super busy. So I'm hoping before the year's out, we will have like a couple of adventures out for Glimpse Second. So.
Where can people follow you to find out when you release more content?
So I'm on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. I am at Travis Legge everywhere, Legge. So yeah, if you look up my name on YouTube, you'll get me. If you look up my name on, if you punch me into Google, I think my IMDb is like the first thing that comes up. But then after that is
Right.
the rest of my social media. So if you want to check out some micro budget horror movies and one romantic comedy I did, you can find me on IMDb.
Just gotta throw that in the mix there. Yeah.
It was the most fun I ever had making a movie, surprisingly. Because I like playing around in blood and gore. Don't get me wrong, but I really had I had a lot of fun working on that rom-com.
Cool.
So, yeah, that's where I can be found, at Travis Legge everywhere, except on Twitch. I'm Plastgauge Plays, which is.
Sorry, I'm not sure about that.
Shut up, Alexa.
Awesome.
She's giving you lip there.
Yeah.
She is all the time. But I think if you type my name in at Twitch, I think I come up anyway. But yeah. So yeah, Twitter and Facebook are the best. Facebook is probably where I'm most active, with Twitter being a very close second.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us.
Dude, thanks for having me on. I'm humbled and flattered and appreciate it. And thank you for supporting the Kickstarter as well. That was super cool.
You're welcome. I had a lot of fun. Almost killed one of my players in the very first session, which was great. Just to show
good to hear. Always good to hear.
Yeah, always dangerous. Yep.
Scared,
yeah. I mean, it's a dangerous world, and it turned out really well and lots of fun.
That's how you know it's a good game.
That is awesome to hear. Thank you. I love hearing people's experiences with the games that I write. It's part of the reason that this appeals to me is because in a small way, I know this sounds hokey, but in a small way, I kind of get to sit at gaming tables across the world, with my work. So
yeah,
it really means a lot to hear that you guys had fun. I'm glad to hear it. All right, guys, this has been a riot, man. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Cool.
Thank
Definitely.
you for coming on and sharing your writing styles and stuff.
Yeah,
I'm happy to. I love talking about myself.
Well, sure. And we've only touched the surface of gaming. I mean, there's such a big, so much to talk about. So if you want to come back, definitely love to have you.
All right, cool, man. Let me know.
Make sure you follow Travis at any of those social media sites at Travis Legge. Just look him up. You'll find him. And we'll have links at our Facebook page, so you can go to those. Also, if you'd like to listen to any of our previous episodes, you can do that at our website of rollofthedice.com. That's ROLE of the dice.com.
Yeah. And you can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher Radio, where all the episodes will be there. Every Monday, a brand new episode. And when you listen to it and you like it, maybe tell a friend and suggest that they should listen to it too. That would be really cool.
Yeah, please like, share,
all
subscribe, do all that stuff. It really helps and lets us know that we're doing an okay job, at least.
Yeah. Sure.
Knowing people are listening.
Yep. And if you have any questions, a gaming question or whatever, go to rollofthedice.com or Facebook. That's probably the easiest way to communicate with us. I'm on there quite a bit, Facebook and stuff, Yeah.
Yeah. I get a ding whenever someone sends us a message, either through Facebook or the website. So either way, I will know right away.
Awesome. So what are we going to do for our next episode, Dan?
Well, I think in our next episode, since Travis kind of talked about it a little bit, why not we go into discussing should players know all the rules?
Yeah. You got a new game or maybe an old game. And now, should those players know every single rule, including maybe the secret stuff that the DM or GM knows?
Well, I hope they don't have any secrets.
Oh, there's secrets. There's always secrets.
There's always forgotten rules, too. Oh, yeah, I had this. I forgot.
So, yes, we're going to discuss, should players know all of the rules?
And remember, keep shaking those dice.
And may your roll be true.